Rome had seen plenty of madness, assassinations, orgies, divine decrees, and emperors who thought they were gods. But nothing prepared the empire for the day its ruler stood before a crowd of nobles and married a teenage boy. The emperor of excess, the story begins, of course, with Emperor Nero, the man who treated power like a stage performance. He was Rome's ultimate narcissist, artist, actor, singer, poet, charioteer, and executioner, sometimes all in the same afternoon. By his mid-20s, Nero had burned half the city, executed his own mother, and declared himself the son reborn. And yet, in the middle of this chaos, he discovered something resembling love, or at least the closest thing a man like Nero could feel to it. Poppaea. The lost queen, her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she was the most glamorous woman in Rome, clever, vain, and ambitious enough to keep up with him. She became his wife, his muse, and his obsession. But one day, in a fit of rage, perhaps over jealousy, perhaps over politics, Nero struck her while she was pregnant. She died instantly. For the first time, the emperor who had killed gods and senators alike was left staring at something he couldn't control: grief. The emperor's grief, ancient historians say Nero, was never the same after Poppaea's death. He refused to bury her like a human being, instead embalming her in rare spices, building a golden shrine, and making the Roman Senate deify her. But that wasn't enough. He wanted her back, and in the most Roman way possible. He decided to recreate her. The boy named Sporus. Some months later, the imperial servants found someone. A young boy named Sporus. He was beautiful, pale skin, delicate face, and strikingly similar to the late Empress Poppaea. And that resemblance planted an idea in Nero's mind that would horrify history for centuries. He summoned surgeons. Sporus was castrated to preserve his youthful looks. Nero then had him dressed in silks, jewels, and Poppaea's old gowns, trained to speak softly, move gracefully, and walk like an empress. The boy became the emperor's personal project, a living doll, a ghost brought back to life through imperial power and cruelty. The wedding of the century then came the final step. In front of Rome's highest-ranking senators and soldiers, Nero married Sporus in a full public ceremony. He wore his imperial robes. Sporus wore Poppaea's bridal veil. The priest recited the marriage vows. Trumpets blared. The crowd, numb with fear, cheered on command. And when it was done, Nero kissed the boy's hand and introduced him to the empire as empress. Power as theater, it wasn't just a scandal. It was performance art on an imperial scale. To Nero, life was theater. Reality existed only to be staged, rewritten, and applauded. By marrying Sporus, he didn't just defy morality. He replaced it with spectacle. The empire had to pretend the illusion was real because the emperor said it was. And in Rome, that was the only truth that mattered. Rome's reactions, the aristocrats didn't dare protest. They attended banquets where Sporus sat beside Nero, wearing pearls and a diadem, silent and terrified. They bowed to him as Lady Poppaea. They toasted to her beauty, because not doing so could mean death. Outside the palace, though, the people whispered. Pamphlets spread mocking verses. The emperor is bride and groom both. Rome itself is wedding bed. To the common folk, it was both obscene and hilarious, the ultimate symbol of how far imperial power had sunk into madness. A love story in ruin, and yet, behind the grotesque comedy, there's something almost tragic. Nero wasn't trying to shock the world. He was trying to fill a hole. In a life where everything could be ordered, bought, or burned, he'd finally found something he couldn't command: love that stayed. So he built a substitute. He turned grief into ceremony, death into theater, and a boy into his ghost bride. It was horrifying, yes, but also heartbreakingly human in its desperation. The emperor's pet illusion. After the wedding, Nero paraded Sporus everywhere. They rode together in the imperial chariot. They appeared at games and feasts, hand in hand, dressed as divine lovers, Nero as Apollo, Sporus as Venus. The empire played along. To question the fantasy was treason. Even the coins began showing Nero crowned as a god of art and beauty, while the real Rome burned under debt and chaos. The breaking point eventually, the illusion began to crumble. Nero's paranoia deepened. His songs grew longer, his punishment stranger. He staged theatrical competitions where no one dared to leave, even as people fainted in the stands. He dreamed of rebuilding Rome as a new city, Neropolis, with himself as its eternal god-king. But as his empire unraveled, Sporus remained, silent, obedient, a reflection of the wife Nero had killed and could never resurrect. It was no longer love. It was imprisonment disguised as affection. The beginning of the end by 68 AD, Rome had had enough. Rebellion spread through the legions. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy. As his empire collapsed, Nero fled with only a handful of loyal servants and Sporus. They hid in a villa outside the city, surrounded by the sound of soldiers approaching. Nero wept, not for Rome, but for himself. He looked at Sporus and said, "Will you weep when I die?" Then he took his own life. Section 1, closing. It's hard to tell what's more disturbing, the brutality or the loneliness. A man who ruled the world, yet couldn't accept loss. A boy forced into a role that wasn't his. An empire forced to applaud the performance of madness. In Section 2, we'll see what became of Sporus after Nero's death, how this strange empress of Rome survived the fall of her master, and what his story tells us about how power distorts love until neither can be recognized anymore. Because in ancient Rome, truth didn't just serve power, it married it. When Emperor Nero died in 68 AD, Rome didn't weep. The Senate declared a national holiday. The streets filled with celebrations. And yet, in a quiet villa on the city's edge, one figure didn't celebrate. A young, pale man still dressed in the silks of an empress. Sporus, the boy Nero had married, was now free, but not safe. The empress without an emperor freedom in Rome wasn't the same as safety, especially for someone who had belonged to the most hated man in the world. Sporus had no family, no money, no future. His entire existence had been sculpted by Nero's fantasy, and when that fantasy died, he was left with only the costume. The boy empress of Rome suddenly found himself adrift in a world that treated him as a curiosity, a joke, or worse, a relic of madness. But power in Rome, like fire, never stays cold for long. And soon, a new emperor would come calling. A dangerous new master. After Nero's death, chaos reigned. For emperors rose and fell in one single year. Assassinations, revolts, and purges tearing Rome apart. Among those climbing the ruins of Nero's empire was Otho, a suave, cunning aristocrat and one of Nero's former allies. Otho had been married to Poppaea Sabina before Nero stole her. And now, perhaps out of nostalgia, cruelty, or poetic irony, he claimed Sporus as his own. He treated the boy the same way Nero had, calling him Lady Poppaea, dressing him in fine robes, and parading him in public as a living ghost of Rome's lost beauty. History repeats as farce for Sporus. It must have felt like a nightmare on repeat. Different emperor, same role. He was trapped in the same illusion, a puppet, a symbol, a reminder of everything Rome had lost and refused to face. The crowds whispered again, "Is this the ghost of Nero's bride? Has she returned to curse us?" But this time, the laughter was crueler. The empire was tired of mourning, tired of madness, and now it turned its mockery on the victims instead of the villains. A pawn of power when Otho fell. After only 3 months as emperor, Sporus was passed to another man, Nymphidius Sabinus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Nymphidius, obsessed with power, declared himself the new emperor and publicly announced his intention to marry Sporus. It was the 3rd time the boy would be forced into a royal marriage, a grotesque echo of Nero's ceremony. But before the wedding could take place, Nymphidius was murdered by his own soldiers. Sporus survived again, a ghost slipping between regimes, surviving not by strength, but by silence. The strange symbol of Rome by now, Sporus had become a kind of living omen. To Rome's elites, he symbolized the moral decay of Nero's reign. To the common people, he was a human curiosity, the empress who outlived the emperor. He wasn't a man, nor a woman, nor a slave, nor free. He was what happens when power bends identity until it breaks. Ancient writers couldn't decide whether to pity him or laugh at him. To them, he was the eunuch bride, the ultimate symbol of how Rome had lost its soul. But look closely, and you see something else: a survivor. The final emperor eventually, Sporus, was captured by Emperor Vitellius, the brutal general who took power after Otho's suicide. Vitellius hated Nero. He saw Sporus not as a person, but as a prop, the final joke to humiliate Nero's memory. He ordered that Sporus be brought to his banquet, dressed in fine clothes, and forced to reenact the wedding ceremony, only this time as a parody, in front of a laughing crowd. Then, according to some accounts, he planned to have Sporus executed publicly by reenacting the wedding night, with the boy torn apart before the audience. Sporus knew what was coming. Before the ceremony, he took his own life. The end of the empress, and just like that, one of the strangest lives in Roman history ended, quietly, tragically, and utterly alone. A boy who had once stood beside the emperor of the world, now gone, remembered only as a whisper in the annals of gossip. Even in death, the Romans couldn't decide what he had been. A victim? A lover? A symbol? To Nero, he had been a substitute for love. To Rome, he was proof that love itself had become a spectacle. Power and obsession. Sporus' story tells us something unsettling about empire. That in the hands of absolute power, even emotion becomes a weapon. For Nero, marriage wasn't a bond. It was an act of possession. He could remake reality because no one dared say no. And when grief met that kind of power, the result wasn't mourning, it was theater. The man who played God Nero's obsession with Sporus wasn't really about love. It was about control over death itself. He'd killed Poppaea, but he couldn't kill his guilt. So he did what gods and madmen always do. He resurrected what he destroyed. He turned a boy into a woman, a person into a memory, and a marriage into a mirror that reflected only his own delusion. It's easy to mock Nero's madness, but his story feels disturbingly modern. Power still tries to reshape grief. People still rewrite the past to make it less painful. And somewhere, someone is still pretending the illusion is real because it's safer than admitting it's gone. Rome after Nero's fall, Rome tried to forget him, but his ghost lingered. Statues were melted down, names erased, but the legend only grew stronger. He became the symbol of everything decadent and doomed about empire, the artist-emperor who played while Rome burned. And through him, Sporus' story survived too, proof that history remembers cruelty not just by its monsters, but by those who endured them. The last reflection: it's tempting to see Sporus as just another victim, a casualty of madness. But in a way, he outlived the empire that destroyed him. While Nero's monuments crumbled and his dynasty ended, Sporus' name endured. He became a story, not a power, but of what power costs. He showed that even in the most powerful civilization on Earth, one person's grief could rewrite another's life. That love, when corrupted by control, turns from something human into something historical, unforgettable, but unrecognizable. Final closing: so, in the end, this is the story of a man who tried to marry his grief, and a boy who paid the price. A wedding built on illusion, cruelty dressed as devotion, and a love story only an emperor could believe. Rome would survive Nero, but would never again believe that power and love could share the same bed. Because in Rome, everything, even heartbreak, eventually became entertainment. And for the boy they called Empress, the final act was silence.